episode of Realistically Random. So, there's a retrial going on right now, and guess where? Georgia. It's a murder trial for Bradley Coleman. He was a coach and he lived in New Orleans, but he was visiting his family. And he was at a quick trip, and three guys attempted to carjack him. In the middle of that carjacking, one of the guys got into his car. There was a tussle. Bradley was shot and subsequently died. This is a retrial because the first trial, on day 3, a mistrial was granted. One of the prosecutors said something that was defamatory, and the judge felt that it's nothing that could be taken back. So she had to grant a mistrial. Fast forward to 2025, the retrial has started. And I believe it's day 3. Yeah, day 3. And let's get into some background before we look at some clips from the retrial. Let's get into some background. Okay, here's Bradley. And let's get into it. The brief. 3 alleged gang members are charged with the murder of Bradley Coleman during a botched carjacking in Gwinnett County nearly 3 years ago. A 2023 trial ended in a mistrial due to a prosecution mistake, leading to the current retrial. A judge granted a retrial that began on January 15th, 2025. And today's the 19th, so yeah, 3 days ago at that time, or 2 days ago. Because today's the 19th, Sunday is the 19th, Saturday was the 18th, so 15, 16, so yeah, 3 days. Gwinnett County, Georgia, Fox 5 Atlanta reporter Kevin Stewart has been closely following the Gwinnett County retrial in the murder of a 29-year-old father who was visiting from New Orleans. Okay. Here's a look back at the original trial and a timeline recapping the daily events of the 2025 trial. The backstory, day 1, day 2, and day 3. Okay. Murder of Bradley Coleman. The backstory. On Sunday, July 10th, 2022, just after noon, Bradley Coleman pulled up to the Quick Trip at an intersection of Peachtree Parkway and Peachtree Corner Circle to use the air pump. That is when a black passenger vehicle pulled up next to him. Gwinnett County Police say one of the people in that vehicle got into Coleman's car. He was attacked and killed. And these are the 3 guys that are currently on trial: David Booker, Josiah Hughley, and Miles Collins. They're charged with aggravated assault in the murder of Bradley Coleman at a Peachtree Corners gas station. Okay, so we went over that. 3 people were arrested: David, Josiah, and Miles. Prosecutors believe Hughley was the shooter. Now, which one is Josiah? The middle one. Okay. Booker was his armed support, which is the first guy, and Collins was the getaway driver. That's the last guy. They say all 3 men are members of the 9 Trey Bloods, a violent gang known for stealing cars. Coleman, who was a graduate of Narcos High School but lived in New Orleans, was visiting family in town. He left behind a young daughter. Oh, look at his baby. The 3 men accused in his murder stood trial in October of last year, but on the 3rd day of testimony, the judge declared a mistrial over improper and prejudicial comments made by the state. Attorneys for the defendants attempted to block a retrial, but the judge allowed the case to proceed in January 2025. Okay. What they're saying, the first day of testimony began at the Gwinnett County Courthouse on January 15, 2025. The first person to testify was Bradley Coleman's mother. She explained to the court that her 29-year-old son, who lived in New Orleans, had specifically traveled to Georgia with his daughter to see his parents. Two eyewitnesses to the murder also testified Wednesday. They said there was a scuffle among a group of men at the QT gas station. And then they heard a gunshot. I heard from behind me the sound of screeching tires and collision. Andrea Page Smith. I saw men struggling near a parked car. Saw one man pulled another man out of the car. Jurors watched surveillance video of the incident as Smith testified to what she heard and saw. While I was behind my car, I heard a gunshot go off, Smith said. The poor man who had been killed was lying there on the ground. A second witness, Owen Waits, called 911 after seeing the crime. I saw Mr. Coleman fall, recalled Waits, in a black vehicle. On cross-examination, Smith admits she did not see a gun or who fired it. What they're saying, so on day 2, during the second day of testimony, forensic biologist told jurors she tested a mask discovered at the Peachtree Corner crime scene and found DNA linked to the suspected shooter, Josiah Hughley. An investigator with the Gwinnett County District Attorney's Office revealed to jurors seized cell phones belonging to the suspects that tied them to the general location of the crime scene. While Josiah Hughley is described by prosecutors as the gunman, David Booker is depicted as the armed support, and Miles Collins is the accused getaway driver. Okay, so what they're saying, so the girlfriend of the alleged getaway driver took center stage on the third day of testimony. Tremaya Pledger, who has a child with Miles Collins, told jurors she gave money to Collins to rent a car. Prosecutors say that the car would end up being the getaway vehicle used in the fatal botched carjacking that killed Bradley Coleman. In a tense exchange with a prosecutor during redirect, Pledger admitted she testified differently in the first trial. On Friday, she told jurors she had picked up her boyfriend the day of the crime by himself. In her sworn 2023 testimony, she said Collins was with Hughley. Prosecutors allege Hughley shot and killed Coleman after a struggle. Prosecutors also unveiled evidence tracking the criminal history of each of the defendants. Each of the suspects had previous arrests and convictions for car-related crimes. Yeah, so I don't know if the trial resumes tomorrow, which is Monday, because it is Martin Luther King's birthday, and that day is observed, or Tuesday. I'm assuming Tuesday, the trial will resume. And this is going to be interesting. Don't know how long the trial is going to last. Outside of the YSL trial, these trials don't last long like that. 10 days. So we shall see what happens. We shall see if they are going to get convicted or what. We shall see. And we'll be back here to recap. In the meantime,
do not jump to conclusions before all evidence is presented.
He was a teacher. He was a coach. He was a beloved friend. He was the father of a beautiful 4-year-old girl. And he's the son of Mr. and Mrs. Coleman, who are sitting right here. July 10th, 2022, the last face that he saw was his. The last thing that he felt was a bullet. Went through bone, brain, came out of his neck. The last breath that he took, choking on his own blood. Why? Because they wanted a car. July 10th, 2022, just a little bit past noon, at the QT gas station at Peachtree Ford. Mr. Coleman took his Dodge Charger, pulled up to put air in his tire. The defendants, who were gang members, backed in right beside him. While Mr. Coleman was down, his rear tire putting it in, this man, Josiah Hewley, got out of the car and went into Mr. Coleman's car. What he didn't know was that another car had pulled up right behind him in order to put air in his tire. Josiah backed out, he hit that car. That gave Mr. Coleman time to get up, open the passenger side, and grab Mr. Hewley. Mr. Hewley dragged him out of the car, and during the struggle, put a gun to his head, shot and killed Bradley Coleman. While that was going on, this man, David Booker, jumped out of the other car that brought them there, came up with a gun to provide support. When the gunshot went down, they fled in the car driven by this man, Mr. Collins. Here's what it looks like. Mr. Coleman's car. The defendants. You'll see the significance of the tattoos. You're going to see it for David Booker. You're going to see Miles Collins.
Billy gang shit. Yeah, real Billy gang shit. But get what? I never get them street laws. Nigga, mind your business, get money, and shut the fuck up, nigga.
Nigga, the fuck you talking about?
You're going to see other evidence, too, that among the crimes of nitrate bloods and sexual murder, they steal cars. And you're going to see the defendants, each and every one, has stolen cars before. The evidence is going to show that as they fled the scene, the car that they rented had its license plates captured on a license plate reader. Well, on the day of the murder, when Bradley Coleman went to the QT to put air in his tires, the defendants pulled up, and then you saw Mr. Hewley got out of that Mercedes. He shot and he killed Mr. Coleman, and he jumped back in. But Mr. Hewley, as he dragged Mr. Coleman out, dropped a mask. You saw that Mr. Booker came up in support and that Mr. Hewley shot and killed Bradley Coleman. Mr. Booker rented the car, got the insurance, ran up with his gun in support. Mr. Collins provided the support by helping to rent the car, driving them to, helping them to escape. So you're going to hear from other victims who've had their cars stolen too. They're going to be able to testify because they weren't murdered. But the most important elements of his DNA, his cell phone, his text, his data location, their memberships in gangs. There's not going to be one cross-examination question that creates even a moment of hesitancy.
Opening statement is where the lawyers outline what the issues are to try to narrow your focus so that you, as you listen to the evidence, can sort of figure out what is it that I really need to be paying attention to ultimately and why. All of the lawyers are going to agree on certain facts. July 10th, 2022, there was a homicide. We're all going to agree on that. Outside of the courthouse, people interchange the words homicide and murder. Within the courthouse, the medical examiner is going to tell you homicide and murder aren't the same thing. Homicide means that one person has died at the hands of another person. In order for the homicide to become a murder, that it can't be accidental, there's no self-defense. So they're not quite the same thing inside the courthouse, even though they're the same thing outside the courthouse. And there's not going to be any argument from any of the lawyers that July 10th, 2022, there was a homicide. We all ultimately agree on that. We also don't really have any doubt about what occurred because it's captured on QT video, and there are witnesses who stayed around and told the police officers what they knew, and they're going to come in and testify. And what they're going to testify to is going to be basically corroborated by the QT video. Mr. Coleman came in. It appears that he's getting air in his tire because he's by the air machine. A vehicle that appears to be a Mercedes pulls in next to him. One of the occupants gets out. There's a struggle, and the person that initially gets out of the vehicle that's struggling with Mr. Coleman ultimately shoots Mr. Coleman. So there's not going to be any disagreement ultimately about what happened. Who shot Mr. Coleman? Ultimately, I think the evidence is going to show Josiah Hughley shot Mr. Coleman. I think the evidence is going to show that. So why is David Booker sitting here? Well, David Booker's sitting here because he has a connection to a Mercedes, and a Mercedes was used as the getaway vehicle at QT. That's ultimately why he's sitting here. First issue that you have to decide, is the Mercedes at the QT the same Mercedes that David Booker is associated with a day and a half earlier at the Texaco in Atlanta? David Booker has a connection to the Mercedes that you see, that you saw in the opening statement where they have the tag. That Mercedes is found in about a 1 mile radius of the QT. Here's where we get to the magical language. The state says that Mercedes is fleeing. So he puts the Mercedes that you have the tag for at the QT, but no one else does. There's not going to be any QT video that you look at where you can look and see that's the tag. None of the witnesses at the QT say, hey, I saw the tag or I saw a piece of the tag. None of that's going to happen. No witness that's going to come here that was at the QT at the time that's going to point and say, I saw David Booker. That's David Booker. He was present at the QT at the time of the shooting. There's no witness that's going to testify to that.
Present our individual clients. I am here on behalf of Mr. Collins. I am not here on behalf of Mr. Hewlett. I am not here on behalf of Mr. Booker. I am not going to be attempting to assist the prosecution in convicting those two individuals, but I am here focused on Mr. Collins and what the state can show, and quite frankly, what the state cannot show. Now, there are essentially 45 counts of the indictment. You have heard 15 of them read. There are 15, but 15 times 3, because there are 3 defendants, is 45. Up front, Bradley Coleman, the victim in this case, is an innocent victim. He was doing nothing wrong back on July the 10th of 2022. He was at a Quick Trip at about 12:38 in the afternoon on a nice sunny day, putting air in his tires. This was in Peachtree Corners, a relatively nice area of Gwinnett County. He was minding his own business. Someone attempted to steal his car. Because of a confluence of events, because things went wrong, somehow or another, that did not happen. He became aware of the fact that someone was attempting to steal his car. He sought to intervene. A struggle ensued, and he wound up being shot. He was shot one time. There was one individual who fired the shot, one individual who fired only that one shot. Again, I am not here to assist the prosecution, but I can tell you beyond all doubt, and this is even beyond the reasonable doubt, that my client, Miles Collins, had nothing to do with the actual shooting of Bradley Coleman. Now let's talk about the first category of issues first. How is it that they know that my client, Miles Collins, is guilty of the crimes with which he is charged? Mr. Lewis has already stood before you and basically told you you're going to hear certain things, you're not going to hear certain things. He is absolutely correct when he tells you that the bottom line is that the state of Georgia is not going to be able to conclusively demonstrate to you that the car that is seen in the video can be linked to any of these defendants. Must have been at least 3 people in the car that was attempting to steal the other car. There was a driver, there was the person who got out of the car and into the Charger, and then there was the other person who got out of the passenger side of the car and apparently attempted to intervene when things went south. You have seen the video. Again, as Mr. Lewis said, the video is not going to be able to make you able to draw any conclusion specifically as to the identity of the individuals. At no point whatsoever will anyone come into this courtroom, look at Miles Collins, be asked to identify him and say, was Miles Collins the person at the scene? No one will make that testimony.
You will not hear any evidence about what Josiah's status is in a gang. You will hear zero evidence about what status allegedly was obtained or maintained after the incident that happened here. That Josiah, and I'm just going to keep saying Josiah because that's what the state expects his evidence to show, that Josiah wanted to steal this car and that he shot Mr. Coleman because he was trying to steal the car. The evidence is not going to show that at all. What the evidence is going to show in regards to aggravated assault is that an individual got into the car. The evidence is going to show that it would have been impossible for, let's just say Josiah, to even see that Mr. Coleman was bent down beside the car. The evidence is further going to show that Mr. Coleman had a gun that was tucked into the back of his, I believe it was shorts, I may be mistaken, maybe pants, but in the back of his clothing, that he had a gun. Only after there was a struggle in the car, only after a witness is going to tell you that there was yelling and a physical struggle outside of the car, was Mr. Coleman unfortunately shot and passed away of a handgun. There's not going to be any evidence that control of the car was taken or attempted to be taken by force. No evidence of that whatsoever. No evidence whatsoever that a handgun by Josiah was ever shown, brandished in the car, or that was seen until right before the moment that Mr. Coleman was shot. Charger, I know sometimes I will say Challenger because I'm like computers, I'm kind of car ignorant, but motor vehicle. Was it a car? Obviously, yes, there was a car. What you need to be looking for is, was it in Mr. Coleman's immediate presence? By force and violence, while with a gun, and the substantial steps. So you need to look for evidence of this. Pulled up beside Bradley Coleman and entered the vehicle. Every death is not necessarily a homicide. Different terms. Every homicide is not necessarily a murder or a felony murder. Every crime is not because a gang does it. And every crime is not to maintain and increase one's status. That is what the state presented to you in their opening, but that is not what the evidence is going to show in this case. Not only do you need to pay attention to what the evidence is, but you need to take note of what the evidence is not, what the evidence does not show. Now, you saw this great picture that is supposedly Mr. Booker and Josiah. The evidence is going to show that is not Josiah in that picture. It is another conclusion that was mentioned to you, that it was Josiah. It was not Josiah. You're not going to hear from any of the witnesses that, other than the gun that the victim had, that they ever saw Josiah with a gun, and that when Mr. Coleman was shot, the only time a gun was seen was immediately before, and it was drawn from clothing. It was not like pointed down or somewhere else. It was drawn from clothing right before.